think maybe we could just start this off of that.
Oh, should we react to?
Yeah, that's where it's like, okay, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Garage Strength Podcast, and we're gonna react to, I think it is actually the best on-site shot putter I've ever trained. Now, Eric Favors had this previously. Now Taman has gotten this.
You
title.
still train Eric though.
Yeah,
too.
Yeah.
So Eric may still like
it's the all-time on-site lead. So I've had, I want to say, 3 other shot putters that I train off-site throw further than this. One of whom, Tim Nedow, who would be like a little bit of like a on-site, off-site, on-site, off-site. But Tim, actually, his PR overall is not much further than this throw from Taman.
Was he the guy who just recently hit the 200 kilo bench?
No, that's Nick Curtis.
Okay.
Yeah, and Nick threw a PR 21-13, just shy of what Taman threw here.
Which to me is crazy, which is literally like 30 kilo. Almost, it's not 30, it's 27 kilos less.
Yeah.
Like strength numbers, but
he's
right there.
He has.
Throwing.
It's interesting because he and Taman are not that strong in the space of shot put, but they convert very well in the circle. And I think that's sort of a testament to how well they can coordinate in the actual event and how well they comprehend technique.
I'm just going to interrupt super quick. It's funny we're starting talking about essentially a sports depth one sport.
Yeah.
And we are going to be talking about endurance today in the podcast. So we just want to get our freak of the week out of the way.
Yeah, and I think for me to echo that, I want to clarify, like, with one, the sport depth, but two, what kind of endurance you need as a shot putter.
Okay.
What kind of endurance you need as like an offensive lineman. What kind of endurance you need as a wrestler versus what kind of endurance you need as a marathoner. I think like that's an important aspect that we're missing in sports performance. And I think based off of literally what I just said about Taman and Nick convert very well in the circle, I think that has a lot to do with the endurance work that we do specific to the event.
Very nice.
Yeah, so I don't know.
And if you didn't know, this is Dane Miller. He's like 15-year sports and performance coach.
I'm trying to think. So if I started in
how many Olympians, how many D1 athletes?
Close to a dozen Olympians, and then we've had, I know we've saved over $10 million in scholarship money, and we've got Earl Kunkel here, 3-time co-author, world champion of the year. And Earl, I need to share with you the document for my ultimate resource for programming, because that's essentially what I think our next book should actually be based off of.
Yeah, that will be. I have like I think people who listen to the podcast know I have a 4th, like.
Yeah, but that one's going to be delayed even more.
Under my belt. But it looks like a 5th. I get to go into camp for a 5th one.
Yeah. Yes. So.
All right, let's react to Taman's monster throw. Play.
Here we go.
Oh, he knew it. I want to watch it again. I guess we. Oh, it's even the hand tape measure too, so it's legit, right? He's jumping around so much.
The cool part was he followed this up with like 2 other throws at 21.
Did he yell boom when he threw it?
Yeah. Yeah, you know what's crazy? So he threw yesterday, we had a mock meet. And I want to write this down real quick. We were doing like a qualifying mock meet yesterday. So he threw 21.49 with a 14.5 pound shot. He threw 21.18 with the 16 pound. So we're looking at like exactly 30 centimeters. So today he has his like
How
final.
How long is 30 centimeters? Is that like my forearm? Or is it like my arm?
Well, 30 centimeters would be.
It's like
just a little bit less than a foot. I think, it's just a little less than a foot.
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
A little bit more or about the same? No.
Almost exactly the same because 3.28
that's
feet go into a meter.
I'll just say it's about my forearm.
Yeah. But
my foot.
I think it's about a forearm.
Yeah.
But I think the
width of my forearm, it's that large.
Yeah, right. I think the reason why I brought that up was like it's fun to try to make the event and the sport all about numbers and ratios and what you just have to hit with certain weights, with certain lifts, with certain movement patterns to try and get as much gray area out of it. Meanwhile, there is a massive amount of gray area that you have to sort of navigate as a coach. So that's why I sort of wanted to share that, because we literally, this was on Sunday. It was Wednesday yesterday. So within 3 days, and his best all time with the 14 and a half, I think, is like 2165, 2170. So between 30 and 50 centimeters is the drop off from a 1.5 pound difference. And I'm saying this so that if we can get into a comp, if we know that in a specific week, Taman can throw 22 meters with a 14 and a half, we should be able to see like a 2140 to a 2150 throw to a 2160 throw, really.
Which would be sweet.
Yeah, that would be huge.
I just want to clarify. I said this was the freak of the week. This is not our freak of the week. This was just we needed to react to Taman doing awesome. And today's podcast is we're going to talk endurance training for a breadth of sports, and more from sports and conditioning, the mindset you take towards how endurance is programmed or thought about to be put upon athletes.
Yep.
And what factors go into it being put upon the athlete based around, well, what sport are they doing?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we train it? Which I think opens us up probably to our first, how is endurance, Dane, tell me about this. How is endurance sport dependent?
So for me, like, I look at endurance, right, as like we have to literally endure something. And if we can endure something, meaning do more repetitions in the case of the context of sports performance, that then enables us to just take a step further and say, like, okay, we have to analyze, like, endurance is going to mean different things contextually. And I think that one of the biggest errors in sports performance is that we don't really have contextually based periodization. And in the sense that if we're going to do like linear periodization, there's minimal discussion around how are we going to train a shot putter versus how are we going to train a marathoner versus how are we going to train a swimmer versus how are we going to train a soccer player. And so for me, when we have to analyze endurance, we have to look at, does a shot putter need endurance? In the sense of their sport, they need endurance to be able to do more reps in the circle. If they can take more throws in the circle, do more reps. Now, instead of being able, let's say endurance in their specific case would be throw 20 throws is a baseline, let's say, just theoretically. If they can take 35 throws on a regular basis, now they have greater endurance to improve their technical proficiency in the circle, thus leading to greater achievement.
From a straight number standpoint, right, if 20 is our baseline, that's our 100%, right, where we want to get to, like, you're able to hold this, maintain, do it day in and day out. And if we can up that to a 35, right, we just made a 75% increase.
Yeah.
Like, it's 175% maybe, I don't know. But relative to what
to
the
where
baseline
the baseline is. Yep.
To where you could go. I guess my follow-up to that is like, all right, 35 maybe is like the ideal number. Is there a point of diminishing returns, like if we try to push that to like 45 or 60 throws?
Yeah. So I think that's where intensity of throw comes into play. And I would say it's so similar to, if we're talking about endurance specifically, now let's go to the total opposite spectrum. Because clearly, if you also look at it from a physiological perspective, a shot putter is going to be doing like an alactic activity. It takes about 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds. It's extraordinarily explosive. They're going to be. It's all like fast twitch, right? So we can see that lens. That's in the simplest form. I know I'm not going into super detail there, but then if you look at the marathoner over here has to do, miles, and they're going to run 26.2 miles. So we have to be able to get them to the point of where they can train for probably 50 to 80 miles a week.
Dane, I heard you ran the inaugural Leesport Marathon, right?
I won it. I won.
You won?
I won.
I heard you also came in last place, too.
I came in first and last and second.
Oh, nice.
Yes, I did. And I think that's actually, it's an interesting aspect here, because I think the way most strength coaches think about endurance is the way I had thought about endurance prior to getting into marathon training. And so, to answer the endurance issue here with a marathoner, it's much more long. It's a super long event. The mileage that you have to get is going to be very high as far as how distances run over a week. If we use that as a relative comparison to a shot putter who we might use as tonnage or throws. And I think when you look through that lens then, and you're looking at the endurance of a shot putter, and you start to discuss things like what you just brought up, a high intensity throw for a shot putter, you might only be able to get, if you're able to get 35 throws, only about 8 to 10 of those can be really high intense.
Is this every session or within the week or within
every
month?
Session?
Okay.
Within every session. And even compounding day over day over day, that would start to diminish. So the goal as a throws coach is to get the high speed throws as high as possible, those reps as high as possible, while having as minimal impact on their larger organism performance, as like it's just towing this seesaw, like balancing the seesaw.
You need the fulcrum.
Yeah, exactly. To say like, okay, we can lean a little more towards this.
Take the fulcrum and move it over. Yeah.
And that's where it's like you want to shift it one way or the other depending on the time of year. And
this can happen with any sports step. And one of the things I'm hearing with this, so with the sports steps within the garage strength, sort of the evolution of the program design.
Yes.
If you've read GSPD, this is a lot of the new
cutting edge stuff.
Yeah, that's being developed with it. Mainly around it, a lot of stuff around endurance and speed that has been happening on site.
Yeah.
And like just, coalescing into, hey, we're sharing it out type of thing. We move this fulcrum, but the one thing I was hearing that was consistent with sports depth 1 throwers, type of weightlifters, and sports depth 5, like forever, like long distance, great distances, marathon runners, triathletes, stuff like that, where it takes hours to do the event.
Yep.
Is that there's these measurements of what goes into the endurance of the sport.
Yes.
Where with a thrower, it's like, how many throws can you do at what intensities? Where with the marathon runner, it's how many miles did you get this week? And I assume, too, at what intensities as well.
Yeah, and that's the big play there with the marathoner is like, can we start at figuring out something? So for a shot putter, the measurements would be how many total throws can they take a day? How many total throws can they take a week? Then the next measurement to mine further is how many intense throws can they take a day? How many intense throws can they take a week? Okay, so there's 4 measurements for the shot putter that are very, very key. Now you look at the same comparable for a marathoner or an endurance cyclist, whatever you might think about, and you look at how many miles or how many kilometers can they ride or run in a week? How many sessions or how many miles or kilometers can they have in a week that would make up that bigger measurement that are high intensity? And then you look at, okay, now, if we have, let's say with Tamand, we want to get him in practice to throw that 21.49, the comparison, or the 22 meter throw with the 14.5. Now, if you look at that comparison to a marathoner, that might be, okay, let's establish what is their top speed in a mile. Let's say, like if they're a runner, like, can we get this guy to run a 5-minute mile? And then can we then take that measurement and say, okay, take the 5-minute mile. Now we have to look at FTP, which is their functional threshold, and say, okay, in an hour, how long can they hold like 95 to 90% of that mile time? Okay, so like, can they hold, like, instead of a 5-minute mile, can they hold a 6-minute mile for an hour? So now we can establish that's sort of their high intensity zone of their time of their training here, that's comparable to the high intensity throws over here. And so the 4 measurements might seem extraordinarily different, and they might seem unrelated, but when we provide a context in the periodization, you can start to make these analysis. And then what this is coming from is from the sport depth, this is the point of.
It's the lens. It's the theoretical lens to go through and then find the parallels.
It's the contextual theoretical lens that we can use to build a program specific to the individuals at a specific level. Then even further.
Yeah, gavel down.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
There we go.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit? I know we've been on almost the opposite ends of the continuum, right?
Yep.
Sports depth 5 with the great distances, and sports depth 1, which is that the strength and power? Yeah. What about sports depth 2, 4, which is like the continuous go, the speed and power, and then even 3, which is the combat or the keystone in the middle. Like, how does endurance factor into those 3?
So the way we've laid it out, and a lot of this has to do with Earl, you, and Trevor, and then all the research we've done on site, and then the research of peer-reviewed studies as well that we've tried to apply and learn from, and then talking with coaches as well, is like, if we're looking at a sport depth 2, which we call speed and power, that might be like, let's say, a running back who has, you're looking at these events, these sports, and I sort of look at it as like, is there an opponent? Is it a constant movement, or is it an interval-based movement pattern? And when you're looking at speed and power, okay, well, now you're looking at a running back, and they have to be extremely fast, but we also know durability, like they should be a little bit bigger. They should be a little bit a larger individual that runs fast, that can still recover, but they're not going to be constantly running for a long period of time. And if you look at like a running back, they might run, let's say, 10 to 20 yards per carry. They've got 20 carries. And you can look at a game like most running backs are going to run, yes, like their yardage might be 100 yards in a game, but they're still probably running like another 150 to 200 yards.
Yeah, you could look at how NFL typically
50 to 60 plays. Yeah,
yep. You got to go 60 times, and it's essentially interval based, right?
Yeah.
Do something at a very high level.
Yep.
Recover at a moderate. Go again.
Yep.
And if you at the highest levels, if you hit the thing, someone else is going to come in and fill. Like,
yeah. And so the interesting part there is saying, like, okay, the more interval based something is, the more they have to hold. I talked about the 90 to 95% for the FTP for the marathoner for that hour. The more, okay, that's 90 to 95%. The more interval based it is, the more they have to hold like 98% of that max. And so then you have to look at, okay, there's a little bit more endurance, but it's still very interval based. And then, so that would be like the speed and power. It really comes down to like, let's be as fast as possible. Let's be as big as possible. Let's be as big as we possibly can while maintaining as much speed as we can. Meanwhile, you go over to the sport depth 4, which is a continuous go, and that's where you're looking at like soccer players or basketball players, lacrosse players. These are athletes who are going to run anywhere from 5 to 7 miles a game. There was just a recent paper in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning about Gaelic football. They'll run 5 to 6 miles a game. Very similar to lacrosse, very similar to soccer, very similar to basketball. I want to say is like 3 to 5 miles a game.
I feel like this stuff ends up impacting body type then too.
For sure.
Like where football, like, hey, you're not running 3 to 5 miles, so you can, or American football, you can be 230 pounds.
Yeah.
Or 240, where if you're playing soccer or Gaelic football, like those extra 50 pounds add up over the course of
100%. Yeah.
7 miles of running. Where
it's the difference between someone weighing 230 and running a 4.5 hour marathon versus somebody weighing 150 and running a 2 hour and 30-minute marathon.
Yeah.
Like that's the difference. Like if you expand it over the continuum, over the time frame, that's like a perfect example of that. And I think the next thing then is like, okay, you look at that, and some people will say, well, what about basketball? They're taller, they're bigger, they weigh that much. Well, the difference is in basketball, one, obviously with the net.
Wiggle.
Yeah.
Or wobble.
No wobble. 2, the other aspect is the court is much smaller. So it's it's a continuous go, but it's a much more low intense continuous go. It's super intense for like a very short time
24
frame.
seconds at the highest level.
Yeah, and then it drops off when they have a good recovery base. And that's where you see the Sport Depth 4 versus Sport Depth 2, and you can start to think about what endurance they need to be able to be super agile and super fast while still having their heart rate not skyrocket to 180 over and over and over again.
Ouch.
And then they can't recover.
I would argue at the highest level of basketball, with NBA basketball, it's essentially a 2-to-1 work-rest ratio based off the shot clock, right?
Yeah.
They have 8 seconds to get it up, essentially 16 seconds to run the play, and then you get another 8 seconds to, like, get back.
Right.
And I'm not saying, like, there isn't transitions and fast breaks where it, like, interrupts that flow. And then also, too, because of television.
The timeouts, that's the other thing.
And the timeouts, it's more like 3 minutes, and then you get, like, this rest period of sorts. And then you have, like, free throws in there for a little bit, too. So there's a part of me, and I don't saying I'm right, that basketball sometimes feels more like Sports Step 2 the higher up you get in the sport.
Yeah. Yeah, and even to your point, it's the same with football. Like the higher up, football could even shift as close to like a 1. You know, you go watch a Power 5 collegiate football game, and you're there for 4+ hours, and you're like, wow, they get a lot more breaks than you realize.
And high school athletes, so like if you're coaching high school athletes in endurance for football, the size of your school could change it as well too. Yeah. So like if you're coaching. We're in Pennsylvania, like a 1A or 2A school. Yeah. You're probably training your kids more like a Sports Step 4 because they're going both ways. Yeah. Compared to like if you're at a 6A school and the kids are only playing offense and maybe one position, unless they're like a stud of studs and you need them on the field the whole time. Like
the interesting part there is that when we've created all this, and I want to get into the ratios and percentages after we talk about 3, is the interesting part with what you just said is that the depths, in my opinion, so let's say I'm a strength coach let's say I'm a phys ed teacher at a 2A school here in Pennsylvania, which would be like you graduate with like 140 kids in your class.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe that would be a big 2A school.
Yeah. So let's use that as a comparison for everybody who's out there. You got 130, 140 kids that graduate every year. That's a 2A school. It's smaller. You got a team of 30 football players. Everybody's basically going both ways except for maybe 1 or 2 players. In my opinion, if I was that phys ed teacher who's also like controlling strength and conditioning, I would communicate to the coach, we need to ride the back of endurance in the sense of a traditional, like, let's make a high-speed offense, and literally our guys are going to be wearing down no matter what. Like, and I know this... It would be an interesting play to see if you run like a no-huddle spread that's like fast-paced and you just try to wear the opposing team down because you know you're going to be on the field no matter what. It would be an interesting play to see if that would be the best offense or a slow-paced offense.
Yeah, where they
have
on them.
Yeah,
I think you could make those decisions based off like your athlete
personnel.
Yeah. Like I have a bunch of big hosses. Like, all right, let's line up, go slow.
So that's where, like, thinking about a smaller team, it would be likely you would have less big players.
Yeah.
So if you have less big players, you have
everyone's 160 pounds.
Yeah, you have linemen that are 185 to 200. They can go at a faster pace than your opponent, who would be more big hosses, and maybe the first quarter they're destroying you. But if you run a fast-paced offense, you can wear them down, and then by the third and fourth quarter, you can capitalize on.
And then having to mentally communicate to the kids too, like, yo,
this is going to be hard.
It's going to be tough on the first. You got to understand they're going to weaken
by the third quarter.
When we hit into the fourth, like that's when we pounce. Like,
and like that's where I've often thought about that, like as a.
Endurance as freaking strategic, like military type mindset in sports.
Yeah, and I think so that actually takes us into like the keystone sport depth, which would be combat sports and wrestling,
which is actually from a time standpoint
way shortest. Way shorter. Now the thing here is that's interesting is I want to share this and I'm going to include
the intensities through the flipping roof.
Yeah.
Though.
the intensity is through the roof. Your heart rate is the highest in this sport. Like 100% for the longest period of time, your heart rate is the highest in wrestling and in combat sports than in anything else. For one, you have an opponent that is your physical like opposition. So it's a lot of strength related stuff. The second thing is there's anticipation and there's urgency around the fact that you're in like a very physical altercation that elevates.
It's the closest thing you can get to a sanctioned fight.
Yeah. Without fighting.
Yeah.
So it elevates tension. So that also leads to an elevation in your heart rate. The third thing is, let's just say in a sport like wrestling, you're going to have 3 2-minute periods at high school. In college, you're going to have a 3-2-2 set up with your periods. And so the thing that I wanted to bring up is I remember, so Pete Renda, who got third at NCAAs his junior year, and in a tournament setting, in 3 days, you could wrestle 9 to 10 matches. Okay.
That's in Philly next year. You know that.
Oh, it is. I didn't realize that. Okay.
I was looking to get tickets.
Yeah, for sure.
They're
I'll be there.
super expensive.
Yeah.
I figure you're just getting one.
I'll get one with South Dakota State.
Yeah.
Now,
I think it's Philly.
I'll have to check. If you fast forward with Pete, in the summertime with Pete, we had trained and stuff going into his senior year, and we're like, okay, if Pete could snatch 100 kilos, if Pete could, front squat close to 400 pounds, if he could bench press 400 pounds, if he could single leg squat 315 for 5 on each leg, if he could have a 34-inch vertical, all of these things he achieved. And again, one of the best in the country, right? Like literally top, he was ranked number 1 for like 10 weeks his senior year. Fast forward to the quarterfinals of his NCAA tournament his senior year. He's in the quarterfinals against the number 4 ranked kid, Dominic Abinator, who's from Michigan, loses to Abinator in 4 overtimes, okay? So 4 overtimes.
That's a lot of ride outs.
Yeah. 45 minutes later.
Now I'm curious with the 3-point takedown.
Oh, yeah, it'd be different now.
What happens?
Yeah. 45 minutes later, he has to come back and wrestle a kid who's number 8 in the country from Nebraska, and he has to beat this kid to become an All-American his senior year. And it was 45 minutes after he lost a four overtime match. The kid from Nebraska is coming off a win over an unranked opponent. Pete drops down, and he had only beaten this kid like 5-2 in the regular season, loses to this kid in overtime again. And the reason why I'm sharing that story, it's a real heartbreaking story. He did an All-American his senior year. He was ranked number 1 in the country. All of the benchmarks we had established at the time, and this is where I'm trying to relate this to, and I want to tie this into my own personal training for the marathon.
You were the guy who made videos about how running's a waste of time for a while.
Yeah, and so in this case, I had established all these benchmarks and neglected endurance training for Pete. And like Pete's biggest weakness was his endurance training, and he would almost get. If he was in a tight match, he would have a little bit of anxiety because he knew endurance was not his best. And the issue was...
He needed that third lung.
Yeah, and so in this case, I think a lot of strength coaches fall prey to this where, my original thought would have been if I want to go run a marathon, I should just squat more. If I squat more, it's like sports specific. It's going to be, I just use my legs when I'm running. So if I just squat more reps, I'll be able to go run a marathon.
All that extra weight to carry around a
muscle. And it's like, that's not how physiology works. Like what's going to end up happening is that the contractions over time, my body is not going to have the necessary adaptations to create energy to then help me work through that long process of running a marathon. And so going in and just doing more reps of squats and doing let's say circuit training and stuff like that, that's not going to do anything for me because it's not the specific context of the sport I'm working towards. And that's exactly what happened with Pete, was that we didn't look at, and it was an error on my part, is that we didn't look at what are things he's doing in the room, because that's part of his conditioning. Is and that was the other thing, is Pete's wrestling in the room, Pete's doing live matches, he's doing a more intense drilling. That will take care of everything. And there's some wrestlers that will take care of everything. If you're measuring things like VO2 max, or you're measuring things like their FTP, you'll have some athletes that That's fine. That's enough.
Is that a reason why when I watch like YouTube, wrestling on YouTube and they go into like the different gyms of like the colleges, I always see like a ski erg there and an air assault
and
bike.
Somebody's like over on the side just
getting time in, like just sitting on it.
And that's the thing is like some people don't need to do that because they are more and Gwiz was one of these individuals when we worked together. He would do bare minimum amount of endurance work. It was because that was his strength. He always had a great gas tank. And so when he won his 2 world bronze medals, like he did minimal amount of endurance because the work he was doing in the room was enough. And at that time, that sort of tainted me like, okay, Gwiz didn't need this.
It was almost like it was a given, like you were born with it type of thing.
Yeah, whereas some athletes are born with it. Some athletes, in Pete's case, he was strength, explosiveness, but Pete needed to do more of this work over here. And so that's where with the sport depths, it's like establishing how much endurance, how much explosive work, how much strength work, and how much speed work / locomotion with speed does each depth need. You create the context of those sports that fall in the umbrella in a predetermined manner, which is like the pre-work that we've done. And then you create the levels. When you create the levels of performance, then you can start to decipher like where the individual is in relation to being an elite athlete.
Yeah, like the ratios you have with like, hey, 15% strength training here for whichever one it is. I can't think of them off the top of my head.
Right.
But I know we have them all laid out.
Well, and in this case,
I know we do have a resource coming out with it all.
Yeah,
too,
with it that people can see.
It's not available yet, but it's coming. It's like in development.
And
I've seen prototypes of it.
Yeah, yeah.
I've written explanations around
it. and the thing with Pete is, you take the radar graph now that we're using in this stuff,
and all this stuff's in peak strength 2.0.
2.0.
What's coming with peak strength?
The next update.
Yeah.
And so you take Pete's example, and you say, okay, Pete, now fast forward to 2024, five years after his career ended, and you look at Pete's numbers and you go, Pete's explosive, literally off the charts. Strength, off the charts. The kid could do 40 pull-ups, dead hang, and then at the same time, he could do a 150 for a double on a dead hang pull-up. Okay?
That's crazy.
Yeah. All of that stuff off the charts. Pete's number for his endurance, if he's doing, let's say, 5 1,000-meter repeats on the assault bike, he could probably hold 72, 73 RPMs for the first 2, and that would drop down to like 60, 58 to 60, which is literally plummeting. And it's like his resting recovery, so when he would be in the interval to recover, was terrible. And that's exactly what we saw between those 2 matches. And that's the whole thing now moving forward is like, can we prevent that by providing that context? And that's what the depths do, is they provide context instead of saying like, oh, follow this system and apply it to a 6th grader and apply it to an Olympian. Now it's like, no, this is what the Olympian needs to do. This is what the collegiate kid needs to do. This is what we need to do with a middle schooler. And then it's based off of the depth that they're in with their sport, and then the ratios that we have, and then where their performance is relative on the radar graph.
Sounds like a pretty spot on like explanation of like how endurance goes in, like what goes into endurance periodization around like the whole system. Dane, can you tell me some things about how endurance training then interacts with strength work, speed work, explosive work, and like how that all works together then too?
Yeah, that's the hardest part, is like looking at endurance. And if you're looking at and I think so a lot of people have asked this question, like, okay, so what does that mean if you're in speed and power, which is sport depth 2, and you have a running back? How much endurance work do they need to do? Because if we can look at their sport depth, a shot putter might only need like 5 to 10% endurance work. And the definition of endurance might be higher rep sets of smaller muscle groups, so we can have greater sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, which then enables them to be able to hit more reps in the circle over a long period of time. So the endurance work they're doing is going to be more localized, in the simplest terms, like bodybuilding style training. Then you look at sport depth 2, like a running back. okay, what kind of endurance would you do with a running back if we're looking at 15 to 20% of their total training based off of the depth ratios? If 15 to 20% of their training is endurance based, if we could take a week and figure out, okay, this much time they're in the weight room working on strength, they're working on explosiveness, and then this much time they're working on their speed. Does their speed work carry over to the type of intensity and a rest ratio that they would have? And then how much time on the field during practice are they covering their endurance work? And you can look at it and say, okay, in this case with the football player, like 95% of the time, they will hit enough endurance in practice. So this is an example of how we get tainted as strength and conditioning coaches, is that I would see that and I'd say, oh, well, it works for football. It worked for Gwiz in wrestling. Therefore, it should work for everybody. But it's not the case, because you have to go to the individual.
And if you're a great distance athlete, like, it's your sport. Like,
yeah. So the interesting part with this is, like, then you go into, okay, so we have to be able to just say, and what I would say with the endurance stuff around sport depth too is, like, most of it you can get done with speed work. Most of it you can get done in practice, like almost all of it. And if you have someone who still has a terrible gas tank, put them on the assault bike twice a week for 30 minutes and they're going to be fine. Like,
when you say you can do it with the speed work for sports depth too, which is like the football, the interval more based, the speed and power stuff, is that like, hey, you're running a 40 yards or a 20-yard shuttle?
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, we're going to get 8 reps. We're going to take 2 minutes, a minute in between or something like that.
Yes. And that will cover.
It's more like a high-end, it's an interval type of training, but at the tip of the iceberg.
Yes, exactly. That is exactly it. Now,
okay.
You look at...
So that's one of the cool ways it interweaves then, right?
Yes, yeah.
Like, that's how... Hey, through the speed work, we're getting the endurance work specifically for this one because the sport asks for more high speed, like go what you can at max effort type of thing.
Yep. And I think this ties into strength coaches in the U.S. is that because they can get away with that, get away with it in the sense of they don't really need to communicate as much with the sport coach. They don't need to talk to the football coach and be like, hey, this guy's gassing out. Like they sort of just have that handled. It's pretty easy to cover endurance for football. Like it's usually, yes, fourth quarter, goal line stances, things like that, but it's still not like a very key determinant to like preventing victory. If you have someone who's fast and you have someone who's strong on your team, you're most likely going to dominate. Like those guys are going to dominate. Now, the interesting part here where I think there's a big difference between strength and conditioning coaches in Europe versus the US is that European strength coaches are more based in soccer and football, football in the traditional sense, soccer as Americans would refer to it. And so they have to communicate more with the sport coach, the soccer coach. They have to talk to them and say, like, how much running are you doing this week? What's that running going to look like? And in practice, we need to monitor. So now they have GPS, vests that they wear, and they can see in practice, hey, this practice they ran 4.5 miles. Okay, well, if they're running 4.5 miles 2 to 3 times a week, then the strength and conditioning coach needs to back off of endurance-based training. But if they're not running as much and they're not doing the aerobic capacity work, then we also need to be aware of what happens, and that's where like there needs to be a bigger interplay between the sport coach and the strength and conditioning coach. And in the U.S., that doesn't really happen. In overseas, it happens at a much greater degree.
So my question: all right, they're running 4.5 miles 3 times a week in practice,
mm-hmm.
but that doesn't quite hit their full need for endurance.
Mm-hmm.
They come in to train. What do I do as the coach? Do I have them do stuff on a row or on a bike? And does that still help them with the sport, or does it not, or does it like hinder?
I think the big thing there would be like, okay, first we need to come up with these tests that we would use. And it would be in the case of like lacrosse, they really like to look at mile times. Sport coaches do. In the case of soccer.
Is that just old built in? Because like
sort of, yeah. Yeah.
Because personally, to me, like a mile time,
it probably should be.
And I'm probably wrong. Like, it's to be done right. It's much more higher intensity
than a game.
Yeah,
yeah, it's really high. And that's where I would argue like a 5K time could be really. If I think in those sports like lacrosse, basketball would be different because the court is so much smaller. So in the case of lacrosse and the case of soccer, what I would do would be I would come up with a 5K time, and this is what we've done with our benchmark work. You have the 5K time, and then you have an interval time. So then you look at these two over here are like
who comes out hot versus who holds on versus who gets faster as they go.
Yeah, and then you also, because they're so speed related as well, you'll also have to take these two and then make a comparison to their actual speed. So like running a 40 or a shuttle, you have to look at that. And then you have to say like, okay, these guys have really good endurance, but they're not that fast. Okay, well, we need to focus their training more on speed and maintain with their field work in practice. And then you communicate to the sport coach on what you're trying to do in the gym. Then the other guys that are really fast, they might not have as much endurance. So it's like, hey, twice a week, you got to come in and you're just going to row or you're going to ride for 35 to 45 minutes, and we got to get you 2 extra sauna sessions. Okay, that's what. Now, this is at like a club level, pretty elite level. With wrestling, it's playing that back and forth. The irony behind all this.
I see wrestlers on bikes all the time.
Yeah, yeah, which I think is good. The irony behind all of this is that when you look at Sports Depth 5, you don't do any endurance training, like zero. The sole purpose of this is that because they are doing so much sport-specific work, like literally running or riding or swimming. If you're an endurance swimmer, not if you're a sprinter, you fall more in tune with Sport Depth 4. Because you do so much volume of endurance work, the only thing you're doing in the gym is essentially anything explosive or speed. Okay, so those to try and improve your output if you're on a hill, or if you're to try and increase the pace of what you're working at so that you're more explosive. And then the back door to that is literally strength work for mobility, strength work for problem areas. It's not strength work for I'm going to squat more or I'm going to single leg squat more. It's literally like, okay, let's target their TFL because we don't want runners' knee to come up. Let's target their thoracic spine because they tend to be much more hunched over. Let's make sure their back's strong if they're a cyclist because they're going to have back pain and grundle pain as well. So we need to figure out things like that. So it's like the irony behind the system is that it's like this meeting. It's almost like a circle where depth 1 and 5 almost come back and meet together.
Oh, wow.
And then 3, 4, 5 is more of a continuum.
Yeah. Nice. Let's do this freak of the week.
Okay.
I actually have to be somewhere soon.
Oh, shoot. Yeah, let's go. Freak of the week.
This is a rock climb. I think this is Panda from the Discord. I think you recently graduated from college, too. Oh, look at that.
That's some good mobility.
Yeah. The legs. Oh, it's like an in-air single leg squat.
Yeah. With crazy strength in his trunk and his hip.
All the split squat stuff. Look at that.
Yeah, that's cool because it's like not only the stability to hold those positions, but then if you saw that one split he was in while he's holding 2 hands, his left leg was free, and then he had to like raise it up real slowly. So you have to have the mobility and the mobility is your strength and your flexibility to get through that range to then place your leg there. It's crazy how mobile you have to be a climber.
Yeah, so much balance. I said inside my head that it felt more like he was climbing with his feet more so than his arms in that one.
Yep.
With like just holding the balance and the spots and the hands were just more to like keep him in touch with the wall so he didn't come like tumbling down.
Yeah, that's cool.
It was really nice. Way to go, Payne. I think that's the second freak of the week for him too. gets up there with Wade VP.
Yeah, Wade's crazy, dude.
I think we got 2 of them.
All right.
I think that's a wrap for this one.
Yeah, I think the big thing with the sport depth stuff is like providing the context for where the athlete's at and what sport they're in, and then laying out that periodization based off of that, and then constantly revisiting that every 16 to 18 weeks.
Yeah, based off where they come up in the little chart.
Yeah.
What graph is it? The radar graph?
Radar graph, yeah.
To see where, like, your stats are going up or coming down.
Right.
When you were talking about Pete, I envisioned, like, 6 things, and he was all on the outside, and you got to endurance, and it like, went to the middle. And it was just like, oh.
A big slice was ripped out of his pie. All right. Until next time. Peace.